Canceled. I don't know why that's popping up. I'm sorry. Right, so post-quantum. I want to see agenda. Post-quantum, then Fed TLS. And then I don't have slides. Oh, because he sent them to me. Oh, darn it. Donald. Mistake. I didn't upload them. Yeah. What the Donald's?
We'll just plug in the HDMI into that and we'll be good to go, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.
It's just going to take a second.
I should have been more organized. We'll talk about this chair roll after. Okay, so that's fixed. Reload to see them. You see them? You see the ones I just uploaded? Oh. Okay, thank you. I wasn't seeing them. All right, so now we need new echo. Close these things.
I can see that I am visible in the room.
Richard.
I assume I am audible as well.
Good morning, Richard. We're just getting the comm set up here, so stand by. So then you just want to make sure the slides are all imported. So settings.
Oh, I don't just bring them up.
Slides. And then you just hit upload. And that'll make sure that everyone can have them officially or something like that.
Okay, great. And then to show them here.
You can, or you could just, it depends on whether you want the console. So if you want the media for console, you can display it inside media. If not, you can just flip the tab and the presentation. It's got the style in terms of key management.
All right.
And then I think you just jam the HDMI in then.
So
And once you do that, it's going to broadcast on the screen.
All right. I didn't bring this closer. Yeah. All right, so I need to close out of this.
Yeah, I'm going to remove that. If you just scroll down, it should be closed at the bottom.
Okay. And then how do I display them? Then I have to run them?
Yeah, you open them up. So it didn't pop up after you left. So there's probably something more to do.
It didn't open up in here though. Is it supposed to or no?
So you can do share slides, which would be
Ah, so then I can just.
yeah. So if you display from there, now that you uploaded it, there it is.
Oh.
I think something is happening. New deck being shared. Share deck. You're ready to rock and roll.
Great. All right. Sorry for a couple minute delay there. Good morning. Welcome to Secdispatch. If you had intended to be in a different room, you can go find that now, and we'll get rolling. let's see if I can advance the slides. I'm not seeing them on my screen. Okay, now I do. Great, so here's the note well. Please take note of the note well. And Richard Barnes is remote as my co-chair. He'll be helping with a few very important functions, like helping to keep this on track and the summary outcomes and anything else I miss. So let's see, meeting tips, in-person participation. So from the working group chairs yesterday, there was an emphasis on make sure you're wearing your mask in the room. If you're up at that mic, you also wear a mask. The only time you don't need to wear a mask is if you are the presenter. Please use the Meet Echo to join the mic queue, even if you're in the room, so that we can keep things fair in between remote and local participants. And let's see, code of conduct. Make sure you respect your colleagues and move on. I hope people know this by now. So now the Secdispatch process. Secdispatch is here to recommend next step for work as an aid to the area directors in terms of how documents get shepherded on, they have several possible outcomes, and this meeting is to help steer those outcomes by each of you reviewing the documents and providing feedback, listening to the presentations, and helping to determine the possible direction. So it could be that we direct it to an existing working group. If that's possible, that's ideal. Propose a new focused working group if it's a small body of work, and there could be a recommendation for a mailing list or a BOF. AD sponsorship if it's an individual draft and doesn't have the need for a larger format. It might be that the draft requires additional discussion, and so that's a possibility, and there could be a mailing list just for that, or continuing on the Secdispatch list. And then also that the IETF may not work on something as the outcome. All right, great. So we will go through each of the 3 items submitted today. Each have 15 minutes, including discussion, so 10 minutes to present, 5 minutes for discussion. And with that, we can begin with the terminology for post-quantum hybrids. And I'll get those slides up. Richard, did I miss anything, or are we good?
I have one last thing for our chair session here, which is that we're having a bit of change in leadership. So Mohit has resigned as chair to take advantage of some other opportunities. I just wanted to take a minute here to thank Mohit for his service here. So round of applause for Mohit, and thank for his work as our Secdispatch co-chair. So thanks to Mohit.
Yes, thank you, Mohit, and thank you, Richard. All right, great. So we have Flo.
Hi, everyone. I'm Flo Driscoll, and I'm here to propose this draft on terminology for post-quantum traditional hybrid schemes. So next slide, please. So the background to this is, as I suspect most people in this room know, given the development of a sufficiently large quantum computer, a lot of the algorithms, well, the algorithms that we use for asymmetric cryptography at the moment will be vulnerable to the quantum computer. Now, it's important to mention that we don't actually know that such a computer is ever going to exist, but we have to act as if it will. And there were quite a number of presentations yesterday about the transition of algorithms, the algorithms that NIST are going to standardize. But this presentation is more about the transition. So the development of IETF protocols, or the modification of IETF protocols to permit the use of post-quantum asymmetric algorithms. So during the algorithm transition period, there might be a desire, or there is a desire, for protocols which use both post-quantum and traditional algorithms, so-called hybrids, although unsurprisingly, this is a terminology draft, so that's under discussion. There's already a lot of ongoing work to standardize these constructions, both ongoing and completed work in LAMPS, in IPsec, in TLS. And drafts on terminology have been suggested a few times, but specifically at the LAMPS interim in April, it was discussed. So next slide, please. Cool. So why do we need to talk about terminology? There's actually quite a few reasons for this. And I've tried to separate into some bullet points, but I suspect people can come up with more. So the first is we're using a lot of different words in different places. So you see the word hybrid, you see dual, multi-key, multi-algorithm, composite, non-composite. Sometimes we're using these as synonyms, and sometimes we're using them to mean subtly different things, like one will be a subset of another. And it actually varies from draft to draft how these words are being used. So it would be really useful if we could decide on a set of words and then use them consistently. That's both nice, it makes it easier to read drafts, but it's also security critical because it allows us to discuss, so we're not discuss things at cross purposes. So that makes analysis easier, it makes comparison easier.
Before I go on, I forgot to check if we have minute takers. So can we get a volunteer? I know we have Richard noting the outcomes, but more detailed minutes would be nice.
I believe Karsten Bormann has volunteered in the chat.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yep. Thank
Awesome. So secondly, there's multiple types of hybrid constructions. So the big difference that's been discussed in LAMPS quite a lot is the difference between composite and non-composite constructions. It would be really useful to have a reference for what we mean by this. And there's probably other things that I haven't thought of there. Thirdly, if we're talking about functionality, different hybrid schemes aim to achieve different properties. Some of these have kind of, I guess, equivalents elsewhere in cryptography, so things like backwards compatibility, crypto agility, but others don't. So hybrid confidentiality, hybrid authentication. I'm not actually 100% sure what we mean by hybrid authentication, so probably good to discuss it. Again, like with sort of the earlier point, it would be good to have a reference for these. It makes analysis easier, it makes comparison easier. And thirdly, the word hybrid is already used in cryptography to mean a combination of symmetric and asymmetric algorithms. So for e.g. in HPKE, does it matter that we're overloading the word hybrid? Some people think it does, some people think it doesn't. It comes up quite a lot. It would be good to decide and then move forward. Next slide, please. So the proposal is an informational draft to standardize a glossary for post-quantum traditional hybrids. Everything's up for discussion, so that's the phrasing I'm using at the minute, but that can change. The aim is to ensure consistency across different protocols, different standards, and hopefully different organizations. Next slide, please. Why we need this is, I suppose, basically what I discussed 2 slides ago. It's to make it clear what security properties a particular hybrid construction claims, and then to be able to assess if it's achieving those security properties. It's to enable easier comparisons of solutions. That's both within working groups, but also across working groups, because it would be really useful to be able to pool our knowledge and to transfer solutions that work from one setting to another where that's appropriate. And then finally, it's to settle language discussions and kind of pull all the language conversations to this draft and allow the kind of construction and the writing of new protocols to happen there without discussing how much we like the word hybrid. Next slide, please. So I suppose I'm very happy to answer questions about the reasons for the draft, but hopefully there's people who agree that this is valuable and would like to work on it. So I brought it to Secdispatch because I wasn't really sure where it belonged. I think on the list, there's been discussion of the idea of some sort of new group for post-quantum migration. If such a group existed, this would fit really well there, but it relies on the group existing. Otherwise, CFRG might make sense. this is really more about the protocols and the kind of the engineering part than the algorithms. So I don't know how that fits. Lots of work like this has happened in LAMPs, but again, it's not just about certificates. Or maybe I don't really know how AD sponsorship works, but maybe it fits there. But I'll leave that to this room to decide. And that's basically everything I had to say. If this is dispatched, really, really keen to work with people on it, discuss it with people, make any changes that kind of the IETF wants. This is essentially useless if it's just me writing down a list of words. But if we can kind of all agree, then I think it could help us move forwards. Next slide has a link to the draft on it. Whatever slide people want up is good. Cool. So yeah, any questions or discussion?
Great. So Paul Hoffman is first up in the queue.
Paul Hoffman, I'm concerned about a single draft that is doing the terminology both for key exchange and for signatures. I think it would be nice if we could pull them all together. I think that that's going to be very challenging for you. And we need to have hybrids for both. But I think trying to do them all at once, and as you've seen with HPKE and such, I think you're going to have a terminology mismatch there. So I'm just suggesting to make your life easier, do key exchange first, wait on the signatures.
Yeah, that's a very reasonable point. At the moment, signatures are more difficult than key exchange. Yeah, that's a reasonable point.
Eric?
Yeah. Preliminary question. Do you know how much the research community is converging on terminology here?
I think in the research community, so I've not read something which kind of defined this is how it's going to work everywhere. For example, NIST just define it in their FAQs, how they're going to use hybrid terminology. I think there are two differences between the IETF and the research community. One is this is the only place I've heard there be concerns about the use of the word hybrid at all. So elsewhere, people just sort of use it and assume that it's going to be understood what it means in context. And the second is that there is language here which is specific to kind of IETF protocol development, so in the protocol space rather than the algorithm space.
I mean, I guess, so where I was going with that is I prefer not to see us develop a duplicate set of terminology to what the academic community is using. That seems like very confusing. So the extent to which we can hoist theirs, the better. If we can't, then that's unfortunate, I suppose. That suggests to me, to going through these examples, I think Secdispatch is a bad choice because if the intention is that we're going to ask everybody to use the same terminology, then Secdispatch just doesn't get the kind of review, cross-cutting review and agreement that we want. I think that was kind of, frankly, I understand how the glossary happened, but like I think it's kind of an anti-pattern. I think so. My sense, given sort of my bias towards agreeing with the academic community, we did this in CFRG, which is our best relationship with them. I don't think, I guess if we had a new PQ group, that might be okay, but we don't. And I think LAMPS doesn't get the kind of cross-cutting review that you need for that. So I think I would say either a new group or CFRG.
Thank you. Barry Leva?
And I'm sure I do generally approve of creating one attractive nuisance to gather all the discussions about terminology. That's a good choice.
This is Barry Leba. I'll second what Ecker just said. I've worked in some groups in ISO that were doing terminology documents, and they can take years. We've had 2-hour conference calls on what the meaning of the term node, and in the 2 hours we did not come to consensus on what the definition was. So it's a mess, and it's definitely not an AD sponsorship thing. I think I agree with Ecker that a new working group would probably be good. Partly because I think that after you do this, you may find you want to do other terminology stuff for the security area, and then you'll have a working group ready to go there.
Okay, Richard Barnes? All right, so we'll go back to Richard, maybe Sophia. And then
Yes,
Richard.
please, sorry, Sophia Philip from Brave. First, thank you very much, Florence, for doing this. It's really great. The second thing, maybe addressing a little bit about the research community that I'm from. There's not much of a unification actually of terminology. There is some for the key exchange part, but mostly because of the standards from NIST and also from the FedRAMP documents from NIST. And maybe just to address and also to kind of support what Paul was saying. Indeed, it will be really valuable to have two different documents, one for the key exchange processes and one for the authentication / signature process, because indeed it's a little bit more complicated, the terminology, or those two terminologies are dependent on whatever value they are giving. So that will be great to have it specifically two. If you want a little bit of a unified terminology for the hybrid signatures, what NIST recommends is to use dual, but we can take that indeed for the list. And I support that this indeed is far more from the research area of the IETF, maybe CFRG, but I would like also that maybe a post-quantum a specific group might be created. And thank you very much. I can see progress.
Thank you. Daniel?
Daniel Kahn-Gilmore, ACLU. So thanks for bringing this work. I want to second pretty much what other people seem to be saying, which is that a new group is probably the best bet. CFRG is really getting congested right now, and I mean, I guess the CFRG chairs could speak to this, but I wouldn't want to load more on them, especially something that might be contentious about terminology. And I want to second the idea that you need different drafts for signatures and encryption, not just because of the technological difference, but because the actual use cases are quite different. So separating them out means that if one of them turns out to be easier to solve than the other, you're not blocking. Thanks.
And DKG, while you're there, so folks think a new working group would be handy. I think one of the questions here is, as the speaker raises, whether there's other post-quantum migration issues that would go in this working group, or whether you think a terminology draft would be a sufficient charter to get a new working group spun up.
I think it would be a sufficient charter, but with the experience with Curdle, I could imagine something Curdle-ish happening once the terminology is pretty clear. Like, how do we work this into different spaces across IETF?
Philhan Baker. Yeah, I think another group is probably best, simply because the way that I would expect that a lot of this work is going to go is people who are building stuff are going to come along and say, what do I call it? What terminology do I use? And yes, CFRG does algorithm stuff, but algorithms and cryptographic protocols are not the same thing as wire protocols. Cryptographic wire protocols are not cryptographic protocols. They're slightly different. And when you're trying to discuss things, that's going to be the point where we need to understand the terminology.
All right, thank you. So do the ADs want to add anything? There's quite a bit of discussion. It seems like some sort of group is being recommended. CFRG has been tossed out there. The chair said yes in the chat. Other people are saying it's not the right place.
So let me take my AD prerogative before I talk about AD kind of wrap up. So the first, I like there is a lot of energy around kind of post-quantum. I personally, AD hat off, would love for us to be able to talk about it in a consistent way. So the appeal of having a terminology draft kind of is exciting for me. All right, break, AD hat on. I think we need to talk, we'll talk with CFRG, and I think we need to have a community conversation about what would be the energy around this other post-quantum working group. We've had a few kind of proposals. The gap has been, we want more work in it. The new piece that I'm hearing here is maybe just talking about like terminology is a sufficient start to that. We would need to test that more broadly kind of in the community. So I think the dispatch is, I think we need to talk a little bit more about where to land this, but we are committed to finding a place to land this.
Thank you.
Roman, if I could just add an additional level of detail there. It sounds like what we've gotten out of the discussion here is that the landing place, we're going to have the discussion about where this should land, but it seems like the landing place is either somewhere close to CFRG and CFRG, or in a new dedicated group here. Does that sound like what you're hearing?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think there's some feedback to unpack around splitting this, focusing this, and the rest of it. But I would, what I hear is, since it was spread all over the place about how you should do that, and you got conflicting advice, wherever it lands would be the place to adjudicate that. Thanks for bringing the work here.
Thanks very much, everybody.
All right, thank you. So we'll have our next speaker. Let me just get the slides. Looks like we have Stefan.
Yes, hello, I'm on remote. So I couldn't be there in 3D. So hello everyone, I'm Stefan and I am presenting the draft federated TLS authentication. Next slide, please. So what is FedTLS? FedTLS is a federated machine-to-machine authentication based on mutual TLS. It provides a secure channel which cannot be broken between client and server. To not entirely rely on web PKI, we lock the pairs authentication keys by pinning. Information about entities in the Federation are published in the Federation metadata document. This is a signed JSON with claims describing the entity's endpoints. To enable self-signed certificates, it's possible to publish trust anchor issues for these in the metadata. The metadata is also used for service discovery based on claims such as organization and tags. Organizations are vetted by the Federation when they apply for membership. By trusting the Federation and the metadata, members trust the authenticity of other members. Next slide, please. Background for this is I work for the Swedish Internet Foundation, that is an independent foundation that works for the positive development of the internet. We are responsible for the CC top-level domain.sn.nu. The profit from selling domains, finances, among other things. Running federations for the school sector and health sector in Sweden. In the Federation for the school sector, there was a great need to be able to transfer data securely using open standards. That was where the idea of FedTLS was born. One stakeholder is the Swedish National Agency for Education, which will use FedTLS for user lifecycle management for the digital national tests. Today, there is a steady increase of members, both schools and service providers. Vendors that are delivering identity and access management solutions for federations has also started to implement FedTLS. I think we would probably see a more rapid acceptance if the specification was stable. Today, as far as I know, there are 3 open source implementations. The first one is a client and the other 2 are servers. Next slide, please. So how does all this work then? Client and server exchanges metadata with the federation. The client pins the server's public key pins. Then the client establishes a connection with the server using the base URI of the server from the federation metadata. The proxy terminates the TLS session either by populating lists of trusted CAs using published issuers or configure optional and trusted TLS client certificate authentication, often called optional no CA. The proxy then forwards the client certificate to a server application. The application converts the public key to a pin and validates the pin against the published pins. If it's valid, the connection is accepted, otherwise terminated. For example, the local metadata could be stored in a Redis. The proxy can be an Nginx, Apache, F5, or HA proxy server. And the client can be libcurl. Libcurl can do pinning out of the box. So next slide, please.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes, of course.
why is the proxy verifying the client's trust chain, given that the server's going to verify the PIN anyway?
Yes, that's only if you can't use optional CA, if the software isn't capable of doing that. So that's just to bypass a bump on the road. So you don't need to do that.
Okay. So you mean the proxy could not verify it?
It doesn't have to verify.
Okay, thank you.
That's if, yeah, yes. Next slide, please. So more questions and then dispatching of this.
Any questions? Related to the dispatch process? Oh, Ben was there and removed himself. Is there interest? No interest? Okay. So Eric Pasquale?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, like, I'm not hearing like a lot of room interest in this, and it doesn't sound to me like there's a lot of like other people doing this. So as I understand it, this is like, from the perspective of TLS, this is a code point registration. So I guess like you can do a code point registration with no RFC at all. So I guess like, you know, I guess I turn this back on you, is like, why don't you publish, take the ID and do a code point registration, and we'll all be happy. Would that satisfy you?
Stephen Farrell?
Hi, Stephen Farrell. Yeah, I guess I kind of agree with Eckert. Also, I admit not having read the draft, I guess, but I don't have enough information to recommend a dispatch outcome based on today.
Thank you. Brendan Moran?
Hi, just a quick question on it. Do the devices in the machine-to-machine sides of this need to parse this metadata?
Yes.
Is there a reason you chose? So, is there a reason you chose JSON?
No. It's more modern than XML.
If you care about constrained nodes, I would recommend choosing something that's more appropriate for constrained nodes.
Could you please give an example?
The typical choice these days would be CBOR.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, Mike Unsworth?
So Mike Allensworth, carrying over a question from the mailing list. Clearly there's a need for this. Clearly the education institutes you're working for, you know, this solves a very real practical problem.
Yes.
It wasn't clear from the mailing list that there's enough sort of different companies all trying to implement that you really need a standard. If you have 2 or 3 people, can you just solve it? Do you need IETF to standardize it?
Yeah. But this is, I mean, we're running federations for the health sector as well. To get them to raise funds for something like this, you would need a standardized specification, I guess.
Okay, so I think that wraps up the queue.
Thank you.
It sounds to me that more work is needed, and it might be possible to accomplish this without a dispatch option. So Stefan, if you want to do an update or work on the list, and do the ADs have any comments? Have you received guidance that helps you, just in terms of, you know, you do have options to go forward without an RFC?
We will work on with document and try to clarify things and see where it goes.
Okay. And if there's some compelling reason for publication, then it can be revisited.
Yes. Fine.
Okay. ADs
Yes.
look good. So Don Eastlake is our last presenter. FNV hash function.
Hi, I'm Donald Eastlake with Future Way Technologies, and I've had this draft around for a while about the FNV hash function. It's named after the first three of the co-authors listed there who invented it. Next slide, please. So it's very simple. It's widely used. It's a non-cryptographic hash function, so it's commonly used for things like calculating something which you use to get an index into a hash table or something like that. Provides good dispersion even with short inputs that have only a few bits of difference, stuff like that. And the purpose of the document is to provide a stable, permanent FNV reference document, hopefully in the form of an RFC, and it also provides reference code in C. It's not to provide lists of lots of different hash functions or to select the best one. There's a complicated different criterion that can be used for selecting the best hash function. Next slide, please. So what you do to do FNV is you initialize the hash, which is a fixed length power of 2 normally, to a basis value. There's a defaults given in the draft. Well, you can use other values, and then you take the data and you would go through successively, taking each octet of data, XOR it into the bottom of the hash, and multiply by the magic FNV prime that's appropriate for the length of the hash. That's currently defined for from 32 to 1024 bits. Not really defined for shorter because that's not very high quality, and not defined for larger because it's unclear if that would really be useful, and the criterion for picking the prime gets more complicated and this and that. Next slide, please. So this is how the prime is selected. I don't actually understand why this is a good way to pick the prime, because I'm not the person who invented this and haven't done the analysis that the authors have done. It is the case, as mentioned at the bottom here, that the result is the FNV prime will have only 6 or 7 1-bits in it. So for certain types of implementations, it may be more efficient to do some form of shifting and adding rather than general multi-precision multiplication. Next slide is a couple of examples. So the FNV prime in hex for 32 and 64-bit cases, in all cases, the FNV prime has 4 or 5 bits, being 1 in the bottom 8, and has the 9th bit on and has 1 other bit on higher up in the prime. If you want some other power of 2 bit or other length, you can just do XOR folding, where you XOR some of the top of the next larger FNV result into the bottom bits to get a different length. And of course, for most hash table uses, you just have probably a prime length hash table, and you divide by that and use the remainder, and that sort of usual stuff. Next slide, please. So it's used lots of places. For example, it's currently used in IEEE standard 802.1 QBP 2014, and probably because of the lack of a permanent reference document, there it just says use FNV and then gives the explicit instructions how to do it in the actual computational instructions. There have been 2 standards track RFCs that use FNV. One of them has since been obsoleted. There's this sort of dense line there listing a zillion cases, which are all kinds of things where basically it's used to calculate indexes into hash tables. There's 2 URLs. One is to a paper with Brian Carpenter as one of the co-authors, which suggests using it to calculate IPv6 flow identifiers. And it's currently suggested in a document in the BFD working group. So there's actually a great website for it. It's listed at the bottom there. The website has some code, including even x86 assembler code for it and things. But there's no published document as such. Next slide. So I would suggest I think the document is in reasonable shape, that AD sponsored would be a reasonable way to go. And one other piece of information is that Paul Hoffman, who is in the room, would be available to be document shepherd.
Thank you. To short end this, Roman or Paul, do you want to?
Paul speaking. So I don't mind AD sponsoring it if we don't find another home. With like I would prefer if it would see more review and finds a home, but if not, then I'm willing to sponsor it.
Okay, thank you. I, with a hat off, that makes sense to me. The AD sponsorship.
So I actually this on the list, but I think we didn't close on it. So I understand it. There's no changes proposed to this document, to this specific algorithm in any way. Namely, we're simply taking a fixed algorithm and we're writing it down, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So like that seems like a little different from our usual thing where like this is not actually, the IETF is not like endorsing this and it's not like reviewing it and we're not changing it. We're simply writing it down. So like whatever's most expeditious to get us like, if we could just like pretend for a minute that internet drafts were archival, we could just stop this entire conversation. Didn't you say that didn't you say there was a document already that already had this written down in it?
Which document?
I thought you said one of the
RFCs. The IEEE standard has the computational instructions for one specific length, I believe the 32-bit, the smallest size of FNV function. But, you know, it's in the middle of this gnarly 100-page document where it just says, you do FNV hash, namely, take, you know, initialize this value to this number and, you know, do this loop and multiply. So,
sure. So why should this go in the IETF stream at all? Why not go in the ISC stream, independent stream? Given again, this is not an IETF type of work.
Sorry, I was in front of you. I could answer that. So Paul Hoffman, the fact that this is already used in a standards track document would make it inappropriate for the ISC. That is, the ISC is saying, here's an algorithm that is already in use in a standards track document. It seems just as easy to get AD sponsored and such. And it's actually widely used. This is DNS cookies. It's widely used. The implementers were able to figure out by reading Don's draft. It should just be something that's an RFC. So really the question is, how do we instantiate this as an RFC?
Well, I guess my point is about consensus, which is that IETF documents must have consensus. And I'm not sure what the consensus we're having on is here, other than this is a thing.
I would say that the consensus was that this document correctly documents and describes the function, including in the security considerations, exactly why it would probably not be considered cryptographic. The security considerations explains why that's the case.
Yeah, I was about to say, security considerations, this is going to need serious, oh, sorry, Phil Hambaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, serious security considerations saying when to use it and when not to use it. And there are some good applications within security protocols. For example, if you're going to use a Bloom filter, a while back we showed using, myself and Rob Stradling at Komodo showed using Bloom filters as a way of speeding up CRLs. You don't want to use a cryptographic hash for that, it's too slow. And if you're going to be throwing it into a Bloom filter, collisions don't matter anyway. And so it's very important. The other thing is, I do have an IPR thing I should probably mention. Back in the day, there was a guy who was claiming to own the use of a cryptographic hash for non-cryptographic purposes. Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. The fact that you need one is...
Yeah. I should mention that the authors have tried as hard as they can to make sure there is no IPR or patent restrictions on this. They invented it and published it and didn't apply anywhere, and nobody else has ever said anything about any of these uses. So I'm pretty sure there's no IPR problems.
Okay, so I'm next in queue, no hat. And then I have Ted Hardy after that, so you might want to add yourself to the queue. So I see no reason to not publish this through the AD stream. This is a typical kind of document that gets published there and then can go in as a downref as needed for references for other documents. So I see no problem in the AD sponsorship. Right?
Just to be clear, of course, this draft targets informational.
Right.
Is this that?
Hence my comment
Yeah.
about the down ref.
Yeah.
Okay, so next in queue is Ted Hardy.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, which I believe Paul might know the answer to. I took from what he was saying that the ISC had rejected this document on the basis of the fact that there were standards track documents which referred to it, which seemed quite odd to me, and I wanted to confirm my understanding.
No, I wasn't saying that at all. What I was saying was, because there is already a standards track document, it would be appropriate if the algorithm that it was referring to is also on standards track. This could go through the ISC, but there's no reason to.
Okay, I'm saying that given that this is going for informational anyway, it's not the product of the IETF, and there's no request to the IETF to do anything like substantive review. I think the ISC is exactly the right place for this. Thanks.
Okay, Dan Harkins.
Yeah, thanks. So we already have a non-cryptographic hash function. It's MD5, and there's already an RFC for it. And there's optimized assembly for it. There's probably even hardware for it that exists in the wild. So is there a reason?
As I said at the beginning, one thing I'd really like to avoid is rat holding on comparing hash functions. And I could say why I think there are applications for which this is better than the hash function you just mentioned, which I won't mention the name of, but I don't want to start mentioning names of hash functions and getting rat holed.
All right, thank you. ADs, do you want to add anything, or are you good?
Thank you. Oh, are you?
So I guess I'm hearing that it's probably AD sponsorship is the best route since nobody else would want to pick it up. So
Well, it seemed to me like there was a blend of comments here between AD sponsorship and, on the one hand, and maybe the IETF taking no action and going to the IEC on the other hand. I don't know, Paul, did you or ADs, are you inclined, given the feedback, it may not make sense as an IETF document, are you still inclined to AD sponsor this?
Yeah, I think process-wise, what the finesse is talking kind of with Paul is, we're going to pick it up as AD sponsorship, and then we're going to continue to have this conversation that we're having if we can find kind of consensus to have it on the stream, and we'll hammer out there.
All right, thank you.
I think just recapping some of the feedback.
Have guidance to be able to make a decision. So, thank you. Richard just got cut off. I think he was going to do the summary of all three.
Should be back. Yeah, just to recap our dispatch documents here. We had 3 items on the agenda here. For the post-quantum hybrid terminology work, the outcome we came to was to either go to CFRG or to a new working group in the security area. The ADs have the action to lead that discussion to conclusion. I believe they're going to do an agenda bash and SAG in our next session. On the federated TLS work, I think there's no action for the IETF here. As Ecker pointed out, the authors can get code points in TLS without having an RFC, so they're invited to explore that path first. And as we just discussed on FNV, the ADs are planning to take us forward as AD sponsored, and we'll get that focused on kind of what areas of review are desired from the IETF community. So that's what I have in my notes with the outcomes. I think that's the end of the dispatch session. Is that right?
There is an open mic. So first, thank you everyone for your assistance in helping the ADs with shepherding these documents and helping them with their decisions on where they go. Open mic time. Any Secdispatch business?
We had one person in the queue, but they appear to have gone offline. Oh, physical mic.
Hi, sorry, Stephen Farrell. I didn't join the queue, but since nobody else is here, I hope it's okay. Just I think this Secdispatch thing is not working as well as hoped in some respects. Just if you take today, personally, I'm not sure the summaries reflected how I heard the discussion. Maybe I'm wrong, that's fine. And I think on for A and C, and for B, I think that should have been a discussion on the TLS list and not brought to a dispatch process at all, because I think we're just wasting time by doing such things. So I'd ask that we think again about the possibility that somebody suggests something to TLS, for example, and when they get a no or a negative or a no response, it ends up in dispatch. That doesn't seem useful.
Okay, thank you. Noted.
Daniel Kahn Gilmore, I also failed to get in the queue. Apologies. So I actually, I feel like I didn't use Secdispatch well because I didn't mention to Secdispatch that I have this dangerous labels draft, but I would actually been useful to do here. So part of the fact that it's not useful, I think maybe is people aren't bringing stuff here, and I'm guilty of that. If you haven't seen my dangerous labels draft, it basically says, here's a list of DNS labels that you might be surprised if you let people register them within your zone because they have other consequences. And here's a list of email address local parts that you also might be upset by because they might have security consequences if you happen to have registered. So I have no idea where that lands. Some examples are things like MTA-STS. If you let somebody register that within your domain, you have some surprising security properties. The email local parts, the classic SSL admin, things like that. So I'm trying to collect like this document as basically a wall of shame, and to remind people that if they specify something that does something like this, they get to go on the wall of shame. It's not supposed to endorse this practice, and it's trying to divert people towards things like .well-known and underscore prefix DNS labels. I have no idea where this would live in the IETF.
Thank you. All right. So
And DKG, that seems like it could be if you could bring that up on the list, it seems like it could be a good use case for seeing if we can do some dispatching between meetings.
I'll do that. Thanks, Richard.
thank you. So we still have a few more minutes. Do you want to start on the hour or SAG? Nope. Okay. So we will hand over now, unless there's any questions. We'll end Secdispatch, and the ADs will begin the SAG session. Oh, yes.
That'd be awesome.
I'm going to trust you.
You could just, we're just going to download the latest slide.
No,
No, you have to re-upload because we made the changes.
All right, so I have to go out of this to open them. Sorry. Nope, gotten used to it.
It's a team to make this work.
It is. So it should be at the bottom. Let me just push over them. Just give it to you and go down.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for your patience here as we do the administrative pivot. We are splitting the Secdispatch into what we just completed was the dispatch process, and we're just going to run into the security advisor area advisor group, kind of SAG. My name is Roman Dinilu. I'm one of the Sec ADs, and I'm here with my co-AD.
Hi, I'm Paul Wouters. I'm fairly new to this, so please feel free to reach out to me if I haven't reached out to you, but I'll also try to reach out to the people I haven't managed to reach out to.
All right. Administratively, we've talked about the note well, but we're rebroadcasting here. Everything we said for Secdispatch directly applies here, and always reiterating here that we want to live the code of conduct, and these are the basic tenets and principles of what we expect for all IETF participants. Just kind of the usual meeting tips, everything we did before for Secdispatch, let's continue doing that for this meeting. Agenda-wise, as we put on the list, we were hoping to have a little bit more. Unfortunately, some of the more meaty items kind of fell through, so what we primarily have prepared is the standing agenda. The other thing we're going to bash the agenda with is we heard some interest in a new direction that we hadn't previously heard around a post-quantum kind of working group, so we're going to talk about that after the AD report. We're going to pause here to say, would anyone like to bash the agenda? Checking the queue, not seeing anyone. All right, so we are gonna move along. So Paul, if you wanna.
Sure. One thing that I noticed is that our pool of working group chairs is fairly low, and some people might not realize that we are looking for both experienced and inexperienced working group chairs, just to sort of know that we have people that we can reach out to once we have, like, you know, a chair resigning or a new working group forming. So please don't think that you need to be like a 10-year-old IETFer before you can be considered for a working group chair. So if there's something you might be interested in, please reach out to us so we at least know that, you know, we have a few names of people that we could call upon once an opening comes up. So please do that. Second, even better, if you're a newcomer and you really want to learn more about the process within the IETF, becoming a document shepherd is actually a really great way of learning more about the process. And in addition, you will help us because, unfortunately, because of the shortage of shepherds we have, we usually or too often have chairs doing that work themselves, or document authors doing most of that work, instead of having, you know, an objective external person doing this work. So if you want to read up on what a shepherd is, or if you want to talk to one of us about what it involves, please let us know. It's a really great way for you to get to know the IETF a little bit better. And then number 3, we do have a lot of erratas outstanding, especially the erratas in the reported state that needs handling. Like the working group needs to find out whether this errata is correct or not. There's a lot of work on that. We have a pretty big backlog. And one of my goals as a new fresh AD with too much energy is that I'm going to try and push the working groups into doing a little bit more focused errata handling. So you'll see on the slides for the working groups that are following that we are listing the amount of erratas that you have unresolved in the hope that you will be shamed to solve them.
Richard, did you hop in for some commentary here?
Yeah, I was going to thank the ADs for helping develop talent in our area. I think this is a great idea. I was going to offer a friendly amendment for folks who might be experienced chairs. If you happen to be an experienced chair and your co-chair is also an experienced chair, I kind of think you're doing it wrong. So if you're an experienced chair, I would suggest talking to the ADs about getting an inexperienced chair to work with to help develop this talent pool and build up more leadership in our space. Thanks.
So Richard, does that mean you're offering to step down? Just kidding. Just kidding.
I have tried. We have tried to bring in, folks in this role. I think with Mohit's vacancy in Secdispatch, we have an opportunity. So if you are a newcomer and would like to do some Secdispatch stuff, reach out to the ADs, reach out to the Secdispatch chairs. We'd love to talk to you.
All right, so the next standing item we have here are working group summaries, and due to Paul's kind of hard work, we have a slightly more informative format. Given that we are very, very early in the week, historically we do this much later in the week. Many of the working groups have not yet met. As we bring kind of things together, if any of the chairs or working group participants want to come up and talk into the mic, we'll move at a slightly slower cadence if you'd like to comment about what's imminent in the working group. So ACE is not planning to meet. Would someone like to say something about ACE? And we can always do go backs so we can keep this moving. So ACME is meeting later this week. All right. Coming up to the mic.
Hi, Yoav co-chair of ACME. Yeah, we've got a couple of documents just finishing working group last call, a whole bunch in various ISG processing state, and a couple considering adoption.
Perfect, thanks. Kosi. Dance, meeting later this week. EMU? I think we have a version control problem in the slides. So DOTS, EMU, NAP. I2NSF. These are readable slides. We'll go quickly then if folks don't want to make some comments here. Yeah, I'm just going to run to the end, and if folks want to say something about their SEC working group, they can tee it up. All right, we're pausing. If any working group chairs want to come up to talk about the working groups, we're just going to do it that way on the fly.
All right, Sean Turner, I'm going to shamelessly plug MLS. Both the protocol draft and the architecture draft have been through working group last call. The protocol draft actually went through multiple working group last calls, but they are good to go. If you remember when we started this, it was a little bit like the TLS development where we wanted to make sure that we had some buy-in from the security community. And during the working group last call, like we got Karthik and others and like Britta Hale to like put their thumbs up on the draft. So that'll be coming your way, Paul, shortly. Basically, I just need the architecture draft to get reposted. Now, we didn't get as much review on that draft, but that's because it's kind of more flowery. So, but in any event, I think those two are good to go. And so we're kind of switching off into like looking at extensions. And I suspect version 2 will be coming on very shortly. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Hello, Shivan Sahib, co-chair of OHI. Just wanted to say that I think we're almost ready to go with the main protocol draft. We'll be asking for last call soon, and there's a bunch of new work in the group that we'll be discussing later today in the meeting. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So Sam, I see you in the queue. There.
Yeah, I'll give a plug for privacy preserving measurement. We have a small core group of people working on the one adopted draft. I would love to have more eyes on it and a wider group of people looking at it. We also have one new proposal in, I won't say new because it was presented at Vienna, that might become up for adoption.
Thank you. Any other working group chairs want to comment on their group? Okay, so we wanted to make sure we also raise awareness. We have more BOFs than we've had in recent memory in the security area happening this week. We had a BOF yesterday, the JSON web proofs, the JWP, that unfortunately ran a little bit out of time. We have SCIT coming up this Thursday, and we have SAT-P that's later this afternoon. So SCIT is focused on what can the IETF do around certain elements of the supply chain, and SAT-P is focused on distributed ledgers and how we can bridge some of those. So we're going to need some sharp eyes to help us figure out what's right on the scope there, what we want to do here, and we, of course, need to answer, do we have the energy to work on those? So we do request that the community kind of come and kind of help us figure out what the way ahead is on those two bodies of work. And as kind of standing practice, we have a lot of other security areas, things that are related to security happening, both in the ITF and the IRTF, plus in other places in the community. If someone wants to come to the mic, this is the collection that I believe we are roughly tracking, but we welcome commentary not only just on these, but on others as well. Barry.
This is Barry Liba, chair of DMARC. We're meeting on Thursday, and the primary bit of discussion will be the issue we have now with identifying the correct organizational domain in some cases where we are looking at replacing the use of the public suffix list with instead a tree walk and an additional DMARC tag. And that's been quite a lot of controversy on the list. So that's the main discussion this time.
Leif Johansson, I don't see Tigris up there, but or maybe I do. Anyway, Tigris is credential transfer protocol and has it's in art, but it has obvious security implications. So it would be great to get a little bit more people from the security area in that working group to help review and look at documents, stuff like that, contribute.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning Tigris. So for those that have been following along, we had the secret BOF before IETF 13. There was obviously community feedback that name was not super, so that work turned into Tigris that was just mentioned, and there was some back and forth during that. Is this a SEC thing? Is this an ART thing? It's somewhere in between, so the way that got negotiated out is it will remain in ART, but it's going to have a SEC AD, so please, we do need, exactly like I said, we need the SEC on.
So come and help out and be nice to the contributors. They are very, very new to the IETF community and kind of, well, need help, and we should be nice to them. So thank you. By the way, I have a co-chair in that, Prachi Jain. You'll be seeing a lot more of her. She's very new, but which is probably going to be the one most visible on that. Thank you.
Valerie, I see you in the queue. You want to jump in? Sorry.
Hi, I'm Valery Smyslov, co-chair of Utah Working Group, and I see there is an error in the chair slides because the report for Utah seemed to be copy-pasted with the TLS that is just preceded in the chair slides. So if I look at the, can you please show it?
Appreciate it. Up.
I like to bring attention in the DRIP work group. The DRIP auth draft is in work group last call, and we do need reviewers of it. It's been just really only internally reviewed, and our chairs have called, can we please have reviewers of the draft so we complete the last call within the work group. So the auth draft is all about authentication of these messages in an extremely constrained environment of basically payload of 200 bytes. Got to do it in that. So we do welcome and request that the largest community look at what we're doing there in that draft. Unfortunately, there is a lot of background. You need to know why we're doing it the way we are. But we're available, the authors are available for giving that context. So invite reviewers of the DRIP auth draft. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other comments on working groups or community activity that would likely be interesting here? Dave, I see you. You can come up to the mic.
Yes, I was having problems getting up to put my name in the queue. So if it's okay, I wanted to bring up.
Sam is
Dave Thaler. In the RATS working group this week, there was a presentation from Carl about a format for configuring trust anchors, trust anchor store, right? Not a protocol, but a way to encapsulate a set of trust anchors to configure on a particular machine that can be carried in other protocols. RATS would make use of this, but it was pointed out in the meeting by me and others that other working groups, including SUIT, which I co-chair, and TEEP, where I author documents, both need the same thing. And so the question was, maybe it shouldn't go into the RATS working group because it's more of a general mechanism. Not sure where it should go, but I told them that maybe this is the sort of thing that should come to Secdispatch or something in the future. So I just wanted to bring that up here, because if there's other working groups besides those three that have an opinion, then that may affect where it should best go. So Roman was there for all this discussion, but I just wanted to surface it to the rest of SAC. So
I see in the Jabber that there's some interest in if someone can talk about Mimi. Oh, no, I'm not saying I'm going to talk about it, Stephen. If you are going to talk about Mimi. Oh, you're asking. So if someone can tell us a little bit more about Mimi. I was conflicted and was unable to attend. Please feel free to come up to the mic now or comment on it a bit later. Okay, I think that's it for the wrap up for in-flight activities. So we're going to roll straight into. Paul and I are going to tag team a little bit on on our AD report. So just to give everyone a bit of a heads up, we are holding a couple of documents that are in flight for AD sponsorship. Phenomenal news since the last time we talked. We have 2 new RFCs on security.txt and on the XML sec identifiers. And you can see kind of behind us where we are a little earlier in the life cycle on the 2 other AD sponsored documents. These are a few standing pointers, but these are repeated questions that Paul and I get, which are, what are you working on? What's in the queue? Kind of what's hot? Why have you not looked at my document? So anyone that wants to kind of understand where we are in status and where your document might be in our review queue, please do dereference that middle block of URLs behind us. Another piece, another pointer we wanted to actively share is that Paul and I and previously Ben discussed on a lot of common issues, so we would see them recurring in a recurring fashion during our AD review. We want to highlight what those are, and we took the time to document it at that first URL. So if as you are going into working group last call in your document, that's a great place to kind of check, did we think about these particular issues before things would exit the working group. And in other pointers, just to bring, make sure we have cross visibility on where we stand with things. We've had some movement on working groups, starting early in the life cycle. This is the most BOFs we've had in recent memory in the SEC area. Again, please do join SCIT and SATP later in the week. And we're going to continue the JWP conversation on the Jose list. We chartered, as Leaf told us, Tigris, and last week we closed Sackett. And we really do have an older set of slides here. So we've had some motion on working group changes. So I think I saw Mohit come in the end, if my eyes are kind of correct. Maybe not. Is he in the back of the room? No, maybe he's not. So we want to kind of thank him. He is exiting his leadership role in EMU and Secdispatch. So huge kind of thank you. We have Peter coming in to help with EMU. So thank you for doing kind of that. Prachi and Leaf are spearheading Tigris, and in the data tracker we have a new version of those slides, and big thanks to Robbie Harwood, who was longtime co-chair of kind of Kitten, and Ben, who is remotely connected. Ben Kade is going to jump in to be the other co-chair of Kitten. As Paul said from the kind of the beginning, we are always looking for those that might be interested in leadership roles and working groups, or certainly being, if that's a little too much, being document shepherds. If you are interested in being working group chair, experience, not experience, signaling that to us is always of interest. We do keep a running list as we find opportunities either to rotate the current leadership team or to make selections for kind of new working groups. I don't think I need to plug it here, but one of the things that we have realized that some of our non-working group mailing lists don't get visibility after the second we create them, so we want to make sure we highlight them here. The PQC mailing list, that is a non-working group mailing list to discuss whatever the community would like around post-quantum computing. We have created that. Please do use that mailing list if there is not one appropriate to the working group. Would you like to handle errata?
I talked already a little bit about the erratas. It is really important that we get them reduced. There's some working groups that have a lot of them. And additionally, a somewhat harder one that falls between the cracks even more is the ones on documents that have no longer any open working group, and nobody is looking at those erratas. And so I didn't even actually count them. I'm not even sure if they're counted in the numbers that are on the current slide, because we kind of look at the working group. So if anyone wants to volunteer to spearhead any of these efforts, then please let us know. Otherwise, we will continue bugging people about solving erratas.
Yeah, I think the bottom line to point out is we started highlighting this last time, and we are in fact losing ground. So while we closed some errata, we got a whole bunch more, and so we have a little more than we had last time. We would really ask that those working groups highlighted kind of at the bottom there. Those are, I think, the vast majority of where we have errata in open working groups. If you could please kind of take that up, and we will work on handling and trying to federate support and review of the ones that do not have active working groups.
Yeah, that brings up Rich Saul's Akamai. That brings up probably is the answer to the lamps one, because from what I've seen, Russ is really diligent about that. So are these old PKICs 5280?
Yeah, that's right. So thank you kind of for finessing that. When we made that working group list, that's not directly bound to necessarily the working group. It's a little bit about the technology associated with it. Okay. So some of the ones for lamps are indeed a lot of old PKICs things. Absolutely.
Paul Hoffman, wearing a very different hat. I've actually been reviewing a lot of errata and updates not for security stuff. One thing I've found is that, in fact, as I tell people I'm working, like going through errata, I hear from many software developers of, oh my God, I wish I had known that this errata had been reported, but not included in this RFC that I implemented. implemented wrong and was laughed at by other developers who knew that the errata had been reported. So it's not just, I mean, I think people think errata is often grammatical, which some of them are, but there are some significant things, including wrong checksums in sample code and such like that, that really have an effect on implementers. So the fact that some of the working groups are so far behind actually impedes the implementation of their standards.
Barry.
This is Barry Lee, but following up on that, I believe the RFC editor has agreed to try to handle any new errata that come in that are purely editorial, and the RFC editor is supposed to handle those. So we're really looking at the new errata and existing errata that are technical in nature, and there are far too many.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's been a big help that the RFC Ed folks have helped us with that. Okay, so again, general call here. The other thing we want to make sure that we say a huge kind of thank you for is one of the things that Paul and I have to do is bring forward the various documents to the ISG for advancement, or to do community to review the things coming from the rest of the community. And that workflow is directly enabled by the people that you see broadcasted there. Thank you so much to the security kind of director. Your reviews are directly impacting the quality of the things we publish. They're directly making sure that we don't publish things here in the IETF that have security implications and that will break things on the internet. And they are a tremendous help personally to both Paul and I as we continue to do those reviews. So thank you to the team kind of back there. And also thank you for Teru for facilitating the assignment of those reviews. It really makes the magic happen. Okay, so we have plenty of open mic time, but before we were going to run into the open mic time, we wanted to pivot back in the agenda bash that we promised during kind of Secdispatch to revisit this idea of what is the threshold for which we'd want to set for a post-quantum working group, whatever that might be. To level set here, because I'm doing this entirely kind of on the fly since we brought this up at Secdispatch, I believe we had a conversation at IETF114 where the notion was floated, listen, post-quantum things are coming. We have working groups that are open, and if they are open, they will be best positioned to meet kind of the challenges of post-quantum agility that's going to come. What we didn't have our head wrapped around is there will likely be all sorts of protocols we want to think about that perhaps don't have active working groups, and there's no ready way to do maintenance. And so the proposal at the time at 111 was, hey, why don't we spin up a post-quantum agility working group that would be the home to house these, for lack of a better term, orphan kind of specifications so we could treat them as a one-off. We got all sorts of kind of feedback. The feedback roughly was, hey, are you confident that you would have the expertise in this working group to pick up one of those orphan working group? And kind of the pros and cons are maybe, maybe not. It was a bit of a scalability argument that if we can do it in one place, it might reduce friction for the agility. The other piece of feedback was, well, okay, in theory, we understand the thinking on this working group, but what would be the first bodies of work that you'd want to run through this process? And that was a place where we got a little bit of feedback, but not a lot of feedback of what protocols would drop in there. And then the last set of feedback was, can we in fact move forward without algorithm recommendations on what we would drop for to do post-quantum kind of agility? And the push was primarily, can we do this without NIST making some decisions out of kind of round 3? So coming out of 111, we roughly left that notion of a working group. We have a template for it. We can continue having it. The interesting development I heard today kind of talking was that there is quite a lot of interest and momentum to continue this conversation, and perhaps it might be sufficient that the threshold for having such a forum is actually just having a place to talk about it and get our heads around what that terminology might be. And I'm going to kind of stop talking and say, kind of discuss. Do we think that that's a sufficient kind of threshold? Are there things we need to be worried about relative to agility right now that we don't have in things like TLS, LAMPS, IPsec? Emmy.
I mean, this was sort of the concept behind Curdle when we did it before, right? I mean, I guess I think this may be a little premature. We literally just got the recommendations like, what, 2 weeks ago? So maybe we should like try to do some of the protocols that we actually know and like are being heavily maintained, and get some of those beaten down a little bit, and then try to take those learnings and try to do the ones that aren't maintained. I mean, by definition, the ones that aren't maintained are like the ones that are sort of like less actively developed. So I think, you know, anything we do will probably be we'll probably have a long time anyway. So I mean, I think maybe like, I mean, maybe let's try to kill IPsec and TLS and you know, you know, X509 and one of the, you know, and maybe one of the messaging formats. And then once you've done that, then we'll have a template for the rest of them. But I think trying to do them all at once is probably not going to work out super well.
Great, thank you. And then in terms of scope, again, I think we have two things to talk about, is both the maintenance piece, and if folks think that they need a working group to have continued kind of conversations, there is kind of some precedent in other areas in the IETF to kind of spin something that up, or to talk about terminology or frameworky kinds of things. So I think everything's on the table. We're
Sure.
just looking for commentary since we're
I think, as I said, my put for the terminology is CFRG. So, so I guess I'm just leery of creating yet another group with like kind of like an unbounded charter. So like I said, I think I would like be a little bit downer and say let's do nothing, just for the moment.
Thanks.
Mike Ellsworth. I have 2 points here. One is plug for like centralization. I think all protocols are going to have to answer all of the same problems. Do we hybrid? Do we flag day? What about size? Which are the parameter sets? Like every group is going to have to grapple with these. Let's grapple with them once. Let's have one group that can say, hey, why don't you do what TLS did? Why don't you do what IPsec did? Like, so just centralization of trying to not repeat the same debates over and over and over again everywhere. Second point I want to make is, and I'll credit this idea to Ali Becker and Rebecca Guthrie, that there's going to be protocols that are forgotten, that don't have a home. So a place to sort of drag up all this stuff that needs to be updated, but no one's looking at.
Thanks. Phil?
Phil Baker. Yeah, I don't understand the post-quantum algorithms. And I suspect that, yes, that was going to be my point. You know, I suspect most of us are, and from the point of view of how do we apply them to a protocol, existing or past, I don't think that we've actually got that knowledge yet. I don't think it exists because, you know, you have the algorithms, you have the cryptographic protocols, you have the wire protocols. You know, PKI is not the same as public key cryptography. It's going to be the same thing for post-quantum. What I think we probably need is probably something that's kind of like an IRTF working group, in that we need to do a bit of education and a bit of leveling up of everybody and explaining what's going on. We've got to have a bit of people bringing in the thing that they've developed in their basement and showing it off. And we've probably got to do that for quite a few years before we're really going to understand this area. But the good news is, I've also got this degree in nuclear physics. You know, I did experimental nuclear physics. I can spot a science project when I see one. And, you know, looking at where Google and IBM are today, I am not worried about a quantum computer arriving in the next 5 years. Yeah, I'm not desperately worried that we have to do this on an emergency basis. There is time to do it right. And so maybe something in the IRTF, asking them to spin something up would be the way forward. I mean, yes, they have a post-quantum, they have a quantum internet working group, but that's different. This would be post-quantum protocols.
Thanks. Michael.
Hi, Michael Richardson. I guess I'm largely agreeing with others. I don't think we need to run around building a group for orphaned protocols. I think that we need to do it. We need to do it for the protocols that we know already. And I think that for those orphan protocols that might be out there, I suspect that for many of them, the correct answer, I don't know what they are, but I suspect the correct answer is uplift to TLS or something like that. And that's as much work as fixing whatever they had out there. Okay. So I think that's one thing. The other part of it is that although we have a bunch of certificate post-quantum hybrid, whatever that means, protocols in LAMPs, I don't feel very confident that we have any idea really where we're going that way. And that is really the signed data at rest problem, which is very different from the IPsec and TLS negotiation problem. And we could actually solve, I think we could actually solve those things in either order, right? We could replace the Diffie-Hellmans on the protocols with post-quantum versions, and we could replace the certificates with post-quantum certificates, signatures, and we actually could do those in either order. I mean, it would make you don't get any success until you have both. But from a point of view of how do we test deployment and how do we do other things, I suspect it really doesn't matter. And as I agree with Phil, that we probably have a little bit of luxury of time here. So I would say actually the critical one in my mind is the certificate and the data at rest, because it's going to be at rest for possibly decades. And that's the part that makes me anxious more than the other part, right? Browsers will just upgrade every second week and we'll be done, right? Thanks. Pardon me? Yes, of course. But I mean, I assume that people don't always show their encrypted data to everybody, but that signed data often gets, out as a place because you want people to see it, right?
Thanks. Scott?
Scott Fleur, Cisco Systems. One point, people have noted that we have some amount of time to solve this problem. I would like to disagree with the idea that it's too early to get started. We have plenty of time. However, this is a big task in front of us. At the very least, if we have BOF next IETF114, we might have a working group starting at 116. That's 8 months right there. Plus, then they have a bunch of time working on the various, deciding what to do and actually designing the updated protocols. That can chew up a significant amount of time. I would, yeah, and then as Michael mentioned, deploying is even worse. So I would recommend considering starting a BOF next IETF.
Thanks. Paul's next.
Paul Hoffman. So many people in the room might remember Hillary Orman, who was very active in the IETF. She wrote a academic document towards the end of last year. This comment is mostly about with people saying, how soon do we need it or not? Looking at the state of quantum computers, when we need to worry about them specifically for cryptography, such like that. I then wrote up a document, if you want to look it up, it's called Octo 031, about post-quantum for the DNS, just locally for the DNS. But we do have both things where we use signatures and we run under TLS. I'm simply plugging those now for the people who say, I've been following the news and I think quantum computers will be available when or not. There is actually, and there are plenty of other academics who are writing this up. If you want that kind of thing to inform your decision on how quickly to go, please look at the document I wrote or come talk to me. Or even better, if you are academic, look at Hillary's document. It's very, very, it goes into great detail and such like that. My personal belief is that, especially for the people who aren't following the NIST competition, when we say, oh, let's just start on the signatures now, to me, that's an indication you're not following the NIST competition, because what the NIST competition just came out saying is, we have a much better idea about the key exchange than we do about signatures. And they pretty much punted signatures down the road to do it longer. So my feeling is, if you want to be doing something now, you should be looking at the key exchange.
All right, I want to make sure we also have an open mic. We have a number of folks in the queue, so I'm going to lock the queue after where we are now. So next up, Sophia, you're removed.
Yes, thank you. So just to maybe comment on some of the comments that have been posed. So one of the things that was said is about indeed if quantum computers are coming and how urgent it is indeed to migrate. And it is true that the majority of the research that has been recently presented states that a quantum computer is not going to be coming sometime soon, in the sense that it's not going to be available tomorrow. But that doesn't mean that traffic is not targeted, meaning that someone could be recording right now the traffic, and the minute that a powerful quantum computer comes available, they will be able to decrypt that past traffic. So it's not only about the future traffic, but also about any of the past one. So the threat is not only about the future, but also anything of the past. I really like some of the comments that were just stated, that this is not only about the cryptography itself, but also how it integrates into the different protocols. So the challenge that right now NIST is actually posing to us is not about selecting an algorithm anymore, specifically in the key exchange part, because that has already been a standard, or at least is a signal that there will be a standardization from NIST. So if we just standardize at the IETF level the same algorithms, we will just be repeating the same work that NIST is doing. But the actual challenge is actually how to put them into the networks and protocols. Some protocols will be easy, maybe on the key exchange part. Some others might be much more difficult, specifically the ones that deal with authentication. So actually having a place where we can discuss how to tackle depending on the different protocols might be worth. And as one of the people in the queue that I forgot said, while this is very important, but we should also not do the work of just repeating what one working group is doing in another, but actually have maybe a centralized place where we actually discuss. So I do like also a lot the idea of maybe having an IETF working group, because this might be something that is more related to research, but applied research in that it touches a lot the networks and protocols.
Thank you, Florence.
I think I'm going to basically agree with a lot of what Sophia just said. So yeah, I'd like to second the point, or third, I think now, the point about there being value in having a central location to have these conversations. So absolutely agree that the details of how protocols are developed should be happening in TLS, in IPsec, wherever. But at the minute, it's all very distinct. And so having some central place where we can learn from what's happened elsewhere, what hasn't worked, would be really valuable. I think the other kind of centralization angle of this is that there would be value in having a group that both kind of makes sense to bring both the cryptographic expertise to and also the protocol expertise to. And this could be that place.
Thanks. John.
Hi, yeah, I'm John Gray from Entrust, and I'm putting on my customer hat right now because as an implementer of PKI and cryptographic solutions, we've been asked about the post-quantum area for many, many years. We've been prototyping, actually we started with the signatures, right? Because that's how PKI hierarchy.
Sorry, John, can you get a little closer?
Sorry,
Maybe
okay,
it's
is that better?
just-
Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks.
Yeah, so as putting on my customer hat, I was saying that we've been prototyping PKI-based solutions with these post-quantum algorithms, and especially signatures. So, I mean, this is a very, this isn't something that I think can wait any longer. I mean, it's something that comes up actually weekly for us. So we've already implemented certificates and have customers actually wanting to use them. So I don't think it's the time to wait. I think now that NIST has actually come out with the first what they're going to standardize, I think it's actually making it even more vital that this move forward. So just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Russ, up next.
So when we were faced with the transition from SHA-1 to SHA-256, it was me and Steve Bellevin up there trying to figure out how to orchestrate that across a whole bunch of groups. And the lesson learned there was, you're wrong, it's going to take way more than that. Okay, we thought the transition would take 5 years. There's still corners today that are using SHA-1. So this is a much bigger, more pervasive kind of a thing. Yes, we have time, but we have to worry about the traffic that's recorded today and broken when the quantum computer comes along. What's the lifespan of your children's healthcare records. Let's get started. It's going to take a long time.
Thanks. Ecker?
Yeah, a few points. I mean, first, I think just like to clear out some like factual underbrush, like the signature stuff isn't ready. I think we all know that. And so like the best we can do really is like kind of like try to get the key establishment stuff working in a reasonable way, and then hope the signature stuff improves or people get a better understanding of it. But like we saw a presentation in TLS yesterday about like the size of signatures, and it's just like, it's going to be big problems, right? I'm generally like sympathetic to this argument that doing something about traffic protection is important because of the recording problem. Though I'd remind people that like we've been sending this data for like 20 years with these algorithms, so we already have like 20 years of this data being transmitted around. So like another 10 minutes may not be able to deal with against the background of that as people think, but like it's still important to do. So my argument is not that we should do nothing. My argument is that we have a sort of limited amount of bandwidth in this organization and a limited number of people who know how to work with these algorithms which are new and have properties that are somewhat unfortunate in some ways. And that it would be good to like, before we try to generalize the problem, try to actually solve the problem once or twice. And I think we mostly solved the problem. I think TLS actually has gotten fairly far thanks to not my work, but like thanks to Billa and people like that. And so like, I just like to see us nail a couple of them down and then try to generalize out. And that'll mean that the things aren't uniform across the system. But like trying to make it uniform will mean that the protocols that really do need it very, very badly right now will not get it because we're waiting for the uniformity. So like, I guess if people want to form like a working group to do this, like I'm not going to like spend a lot of time arguing against it, but like I don't want to hold up the work in TLS and IPsec and LAMPS for that to happen.
So thanks. So that drains our queue on this particular topic. We appreciate the community, feedback. The recurring thing, we do here when we've asked this time, and we previously asked in this kind of temperature check. There is this big kind of question on when we should act and what's appropriate to act on given the information that we have now. So we're going to have to kind of take this back and kind of think through what that practically means. But we very much appreciate, again, being able to do this temperature check, and it came up again in Secdispatch. Okay, so given where we are with the agenda, we're going to just transition to full-on open mic. Is there anything someone would like to come talk to us about? Going once? Going twice? All right, we very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for helping us dispatch all our items in the early session and for this conversation we just had in SAG to raise everyone's awareness. We're going to break early for lunch. Have a good rest of your IETF week. That's right.
I'll make sure to upload the slide deck.
Yeah. No. There's a meetup. Something with the. It's the data tracker one's up to date. I think we just. There's a refresh mechanism. I think just something didn't happen on the refresh side. So I think we are in fact. But you should check. I